Yeah,
Awesome.
we
All
can.
right. If you all can hear me, I just wanted to thank you for inviting me. I speak, I think, for myself and for my students, if they don't mind. Some of them are here. When I say that your lab is a real inspiration for us, there's lots of stuff that, we picked from seeing how you've evolved research concepts, and we try to expand them or try to do them in different ways, but with lots of inspiration from you and also from a lot of the other speakers you have lined up for this anniversary. And again, congratulations on the anniversary. I honestly feel like I want to talk less and listen more because there's so many more amazing people here that I just want to listen from. I'm going to share my slides and hopefully you can see them. I'm going to full screen them, and if that does not work by any reason, you let me know. So I'm just going to jump straight into one example of what I call integrating devices with the human body. Before this gets too abstract, I'd just like to show you a little teaser of a system that we built some years ago called Muscle Plotter. You see two car designers, they're trying to figure out which of these two car shapes is the most aerodynamic. That's what car designers do. Now, they're not going to go to a computer simulator and, look at that on Autodesk Fusion or something like that. They're going to use pen and paper, right? They were already drawing on pen and paper, but they're going to go through the wind flow simulation also on pen and paper. You see they're using a pen. It's a standard digitizer pen called an Anoto pen. So everything they're writing is being picked up by the computer system. Now, what's interesting is that this person is actually plotting the wind flow simulation. He's plotting the result of how the wind goes across the car, and they can inspect the turbulent lines and stuff like that. And this is where it gets interesting and weird. How does the user know the wind flow simulation result? If they knew that, they wouldn't need a simulator. And the reality is they don't. If you see on the right side, this person has patches, little white patches attached to their muscles, which are sending electrical impulses and controlling their wrist to the left and to the right so as to actually draw and to plot, hence the name muscle plotter. And so it is a computer system that takes momentarily control of their arm and plots it. And that's one of the examples that I wanted to show you. Now, why did Saranga ask me to talk here, and why do I do research on putting electrodes onto people? Well, I think it's a fantastic space in the point we are today in the history of computing devices. If you think back of where this whole thing started, some of the people have been much longer in computer science than I had, and they were actually at the time, where computers and users were not even in the same room. Maybe MIT had one computer and people could only access it from the next room, and there was a terminal to access it, and computers were gigantic. But as things evolved and we passed through personal computers and eventually into smaller and smaller form factors until we reach a very interesting point where the device is actually smaller than the user. Smaller bubble here is the device, and the bigger bubble here is the user. In the 90s, we got this fantastic device that kept evolving, and now it's probably the one thing that we use the most, the smartphone. And it's interesting because computers moved together into our pockets. They were with us more often. More recently, wearable devices brought computers in contact with the skin. And that seems just a small change in form factor, but it's a big change in possibilities because now you have all the stuff that Patty does, like physiological sensing, understanding moods, understanding brainwave states, and so forth, right? And that was unlocked by this touching of these two bubbles. And if you go around, Kai and this symposium and many other places and ask what's happening next, I'm sure a lot of people will give you a number of creative answers. That's what we're here for, researchers. And one of the ones that I hear more often is this one. And I absolutely agree. The bubbles are getting, together, and the devices are going to go inside the body, so-called implanted devices. And I'll say that I think that has already happened tremendously around us. It's just that they're implanted, so they're hard to see. Many people have cochlear implants, pacemakers, insulin pumps, a lot of devices that actually don't even expose an interface because they're subdermal, they're inside of us. But I think there's a property that is even more interesting to plot the next thing, or the evolution, than just the location, right? The location is whether it's inside or outside. And that property is how much of the device integrates with your body and the functions of your body. Does it replace something you already have? Does it supplant something you already have? Does it provide something you can't do? And that's what I'm talking about when I mean devices that are integrated with the human body. So they're not completely subsumed, they actually overlap partly with your body. And then so in my lab, what we do is we create devices that intentionally borrow parts of the human body or functions, biological functions of the human body for input or output, rather than adding another piece of technology. Maybe we don't need a microcontroller because we have something here that can perform that function. So let me show you a couple of examples, and obviously just to illustrate, muscle plotter is such an example. If, I would ask you to look at muscle plotter and identify all the components, you would say the pen and the computer in the back end that we don't see right now with all its wireless and etc., and the muscle stimulator. And at some point, you would be forced to say, that's what I want you, putting you a corner, be forced to say, and the user's muscles. Because without the user's muscles, there is no plotting, right? So the user's muscles are an integral part of this device. All right, so we've been exploring this in sort of two different tracks, and I want to tell you mostly about one track because we're limited on time, and then if you're interested, we can chat on Slack about the other track of the work that we do. The first track is about thinking of the body as an actuator, but an interesting actuator, one that provides an alternative to external haptic actuators. If you've bumped into the word haptics, you know what it means. If you haven't, you've probably seen it in the mainstream media. It's everything that has to do with a sense of touch. When you are in virtual reality and you want things to be feelable, when researchers supply you some kind of sensation that you can feel that world, that's exactly what I mean when I say haptics. And in fact, VR is the main motivator to some of the haptics achievements of the last decades and decades. And it happens because VR is already overwhelming our senses. Our eyes, when we put on a little headset and look at these worlds, they're really photorealistic and beautiful. The things I show on the slide are from my student Jazz. I think they're here. And they made this overnight. This is not even a Pixar movie. And this is already really compelling. I tell you that when the first time I tried this desert in the snowy mountain, I kind of felt like I was there. But then I went and tried to push against the shed of Jazz's shed over there in the snowy mountain. I was like, oh yeah, well, the illusion breaks immediately because there is nothing there. There is no force. I felt nothing. Now, if you rewind the history of computing, I'm sure many of you already did that in your minds, and you're like, wait, Pedro, there is a solution. We've already made the point. We have it. We have these devices. They're called haptic devices, such as mechanical exoskeletons. They provide realistic forces. They're fantastic to control. They're incredibly precise. You see a person here playing with a ball up and down the incline. They could be in VR. This device is actually made for VR. And they feel gravity acting on that ball. They feel a resistive force. They have to push against the motors. Problem is, they're also tethered to the wall. The device is really big, uses a lot of batteries. It is at odds with the VR that everyone in this room is thinking of. It's at odds with the mobility that affords the today's VR. This is the stuff you can buy, not the standalone sitting down VR anymore. So one of the challenges of my work, and this is mostly the work I did in my PhD, was can we come up with another creative approach to miniaturizing this device? And this has to, this is a physical device. It abides by the laws of physics. If you shrink down the motor and you put less energy because you have a smaller battery, because you're trying to make it all lighter, you're going to get less output force. And that's a paradox, right? You want to be realistic, you want to have output force, yet you want to have a really small device and you want to miniaturize it. And so we came up with a different approach for that, which is to use electrical muscle stimulation to find a way to move something, a motor that is already there, which are the muscles. This is a technology invented a long time ago in the field of medical rehabilitation and somewhat before, where you use electrical impulses over these electrodes connected to the skin. I'm just going to give an example. If you would stimulate these two top electrodes here, your muscles would sort of like move upwards. Your wrist would move upwards involuntarily, out of your control, automatically. And we're taking this out of the rehab space and putting it into interactive use and exploring how can we actually miniaturize motors. So let me show you an example of someone in VR experiencing force feedback without having an exoskeleton. He's touching the walls and the walls are repulsive. They repel his hand backwards. He's pushing on a big button with a big spring and it's hard to push because he's pushing that way and the VR is pushing this way. And ultimately he's going to do the same as the exoskeleton person did, which is he's going to like push against a cube and he's going to hold on a cube against gravity. And as he holds the cube upwards, he's pushing up and gravity is pushing down, but gravity is an illusion here. It's just your muscles involuntarily going down. And there you have it. He's trying to hold it. And once you let go, he feels that force be released. Now, we've explored this in a number of ways of different situations, mobile devices, AR devices, etc., where you just take out the motor and you put the muscle stimulation. And when you juxtapose the two approaches, what I think really stands out is the approach that we're doing in the lab is rather than adding more electronics to externally induce a sensation, like pushing the hand to simulate a wall, we find out what is the minimum number of components that we need to trick the user's biology into internally inducing that sensation. And we think for the case of force feedback, the minimum number of components might be muscle stimulation. All right, now the big question, when I started my lab 3 years ago here at the University of Chicago that I was very curious about was, well, is this sort of a one-trick pony? Can we do this in any other senses, or that's it? We can only replace motors, and that's the end of the sort of miniaturization of VR that we can do with the body integration approach. And so let me show you 2 more examples. I don't want to take too much of your time, of other sensory modalities that, together with my students, we've been trying to achieve in a different form factor. So again, if you want to make VR realistic, people often resort to temperature stimulation. If you want to be in a VR desert, I'll tell you, it's incredibly boring if you don't feel hot. So people use things like this. I've tried this. It's amazing. You got a heat lamp over you. Air molecules are really getting hot and jittery, and so you feel that tension. It's really lovely. But of course, you're not going to walk around with a heat lamp because it's a very heavy device. And so the challenge is the same. Can we reduce the power consumption? Can we come up with a different way, an illusion for this? This is work from my student Jazz at CHI 2020, where they found out a new way to create temperature sensations in virtual reality. This person here, she is feeling temperature, but the room is always at the same temperature throughout this demo, okay? She's feeling some heat emanating from the virtual furnace because Jazz is injecting small amounts of a chemical called capsaicin in her nose. That chemical is odorless, but intersects with her trigeminal nerve, one of the nerves inside our nose, and she feels hot. This happens because when you eat chili food, chili peppers and spicy food, you also feel hot. This is a biological illusion. Now, as you can see, the environment got cold because, the door flang open and the room is really cold, and we start to emit eucalyptal, a compound similar to menthol, and maybe you've tried breath mints, and every time you have a breath mint, you feel really cold, really refreshed. Same illusion, different receptor. It's the cold receptor, but it's a chemical way to get to that temperature nerve. And you get the idea. As she's walking around more and more in that virtual environment, it's getting colder and colder, and so Jazz is emitting eucalyptal more frequently. And she's going to find out the power of a backup generator. She's going to go back to the cabin, so forth, so forth. I invite you to watch the rest on YouTube. It's kind of a really fun experiment. Now, what is interesting is to go back and contrast these 2 things. What Jazz created, trigeminal temperature illusions, is really just a device that pulverizes a little piece of smell. It's just inspired by actually Patty and Judith Amora's Essence device, right? The beautiful thing is that now we don't have to take kilowatts of power. We need a quarter of a watt, but we can do temperature. It's not an olfactory device, but it's a temperature-based device. And it's yet another showcase of this idea of, let me find the minimal components to internally induce the sensation of temperature. Now, we got really excited over this, and my student Jasmine has an upcoming paper coming up in, I guess, a week. She's also here at UIST 21, where she collaborated also with Jazz, and we've been exploring whether we can do this not just in temperature, but other more diverse haptic sensations. So you see Jasmine here. She's wearing a virtual reality device, and she's doing a really fun experiment where you're trying to save a nuclear reactor from meltdown.
Nuclear reactor overheating. Please report to control room immediately.
Now she uses her arm interface to navigate the map and open doors, etc. But of course, it's a meltdowning reactor, so something is going to go bad very soon. And the whole arm interface starts to glitch. And you can see that visually, the arm interface is emitting these electrical sparks. But not only she sees that visually, she also feels a haptic sensation associated with this electrical sparks. She feels this tingling sensation, almost like an electrical zapping sensation, because we are circulating a chemical on her skin called sensual that, when they interact with your skin nerves, creates a tingling sensation. This is also, by the way, a spice that you can eat. Now she keeps walking and she goes outside, it's cold. Yes, we can do the mental trick also on the skin rather than on the nose. And what she's now feeling is an extreme blast of cold. This one is really strong, actually. Extreme blast of cold as her device is circulating menthol on her cheeks, just above the area where the headset is right there. All right, we've shown not only hot, cold, and things like stinging, which are very difficult to achieve with standard haptic devices, but even sort of negative haptics, which I'm super excited about. We can do numbing. We can remove the haptic sensation because we can use lidocaine, which is a topical anesthetic that sometimes you may be familiar from experiences in the dentist. All right, now again, what is really interesting in this chemical haptics approach is to contrast it with the traditional way I've been also doing haptics, which is to search for an external mechanical actuator and say, okay, I want to do stinging, therefore I take like a little pricking needle and I'm going to actuate it and so forth. Well, now we can just put a different vial of a chemical, pass it in this microfluidics patch, and the correct receptor that responds to stinging sensations will be triggered. Again, just internally. We're not really adding the mechanical force to create the stinging, we're adding the chemical force to trick you into that illusion. So the top row of my work is really about the sort of haptic output side. And of course, I sort of promised you at the beginning, and I've showed you muscle plotter where I said, we're sort of integrating the user and the device in one thing. And so it suggests that the close of the loop is necessary. And that's indeed what the second half of our work is about. I won't show you all these projects, but they're all online if you want to see. I'll just cherry pick one that I think illustrates the potentials of this integration. And it's heavily inspired by a lot of the work you'll see here today, of course, Patty and Saranga and many others, where we're looking at what happens when you close loops. And here we're closing a physical loop. So here's the idea behind this project, which we nicknamed at the time Affordance++. Like in many other these projects, we bring people to the lab and we calibrate them with our new device. And in the case, the device here was electrical muscle stimulation to their hands. We're calibrated, but here we were not interested in their realism and VR. We're interested in seeing if we could help them understand things they might not immediately realize they have to do. So it's more of an assistive kind of tool. So here we asked them to do tasks. For instance, we asked them, can you paint this drawing using a spray can? Here's what happens.
Okay, that was cool. I totally would have forgot to shake it.
I need to shake it.
So you can see the muscle stimulation kicks in and shakes the can first. And then people start to get a sort of rationalizing process and they shake themselves. And they are together with the system trying to figure out how to operate this tool that apparently they had some troubles operating. Computer scientists, is another finding, that don't know how to operate a spray can.
Quite cool, because I totally forgot that I had to shake.
But the idea here is complementing the affordance of this object, which is limited in the case of telling you got to shake it, right? The affordance of this object is fantastic. It's cylindrical, you got to grasp it, and there's so many beautiful things about a spray can. But it doesn't suggest shaking. You have to actually read the instructions and says shake before use. And here, the system is collaborating with you to tell you that you have to do that. Now, just taking a step back, sort of more in a conclusion style mode, I think what's interesting is, well, there's obviously this path, and I think integrated might be even a super group where implanted is inside. There's lots of different things we could talk about of this evolution, and maybe I'm all wrong, and I'm happy to be corrected. But I think there's one thing that is very clear to me. And that's that when I'm interacting with a device like my smartphone or a wearable, I sort of have to instruct the device. And we heard Patty talk about these sort of modes of explicit operation. And now with these more new devices that we're seeing, and many labs are also creating, we have this feeling of shared agency. Muscle plotter is such a great extreme example because you're literally lending your body momentarily to become a plotter. And so the device sometimes takes over control. And we felt in my lab, this was such an interesting moment to explore this blending of agency and designing trustworthy and what's not trustworthy systems, as Albrecht said beautifully in the beginning, that we sort of created a own track of research where we only spend time in understanding the agency. How do people feel of the sensation of control in these kinds of new integrated devices? And sometimes, we put the artistic cap on and we go to explored the ethical implications of this. We made an art piece that we took to Ars Electronica, which was really great as a conversation starter to get people experiencing this and talking about this. Sometimes we put sort of a neuroscientist hat on and we go, try to understand which part of your cortex is responsible for understanding if it's the EMS moving, the muscle stimulation, or you that is moving. And can we do something with that, right? Can we help you feel more like in control? And in fact, in a recent project by my postdoc, June, and also Shinichi, one of my friends and collaborators at Sony, we've been exploring whether we can give people a sense of faster reaction time, right? I'm actually accelerating you with muscle stimulation. We can do that, but we don't want you to lose the sense of control. We want to accelerate you and yet feel like we're helping you. You feel like you're empowered of that movement. And so we found out a couple of tricks where we can actually speed up someone's reaction time, yet they still feel in control. Here you see a person taking a picture. This picture was taken by muscle stimulation. You cannot take a picture of a flying baseball with your reaction time. It's just humanly not possible. But this person actually feels in control because we tuned when the muscle stimulation appears with your own volition. We tune it very close to your normal volition, just a little faster, so we can still help you. That's pretty much it. I'm just going to conclude with 4 small messages. I think the first is that, my group and many others all over the place are exploring different takes on this, but we all just started integrating the devices with the body. I'm just really excited to see what it means for everyone and what we can all do with this. Personally, we feel like this is sort of the superseding paradigm that comes after wearables, and I think that's interesting to think really what's the next paradigm after this shift that we had from mobile to wearables, where now interactions happen everywhere, anytime. And I think now it's really because they are with your body and they're sort of overlapping in many interesting ways. The other thing is the benefits of this, right? I'm not saying at all that we have to replace the devices we have, but I'm saying these things are different and they afford different benefits to us. Something like Muscle Plotter gives you a very physical style of interaction. Obviously, it is not better than a screen. This is very, very slow. But remember the moments where you take a pen and sketch. That moment creatively and in terms of mobility and expression is very different from looking at a screen. Muscle Plotter blends this. It's a digital, yet it's sketching based. We think these devices are really great for better simulations, like that VR walls. You can have this without carrying an exoskeleton. We think they're great for learning, like Affordance++, where you can learn how to operate a tool. Maybe you have no idea how it works, and yet you're learning with your body. You're not reading an instruction manual. And last but not least, and I didn't show this work from my postdoc June, they're interesting for you to get a bodily perspective of what others might be going through, right? So here you see an exoskeleton hand that miniaturizes the size of your own hand. And if you're a toy designer, you could imagine just slipping this in, and that's the study we did, slipping this in, and you're now feeling how a 5-year-old kid will grab the ergonomics of the toy you are making. You're not seeing the specification sheet with a ruler and kind of trying to figure out, oh, okay, the American 5-year-old has a grasp of so and so. No, you're just trying it out with a modification, temporary modification of your perception, which allows you this gateway or pathway into a more empathic kind of moment. Again, this is from my postdoc June. All right, now I did not do this work alone at all. I had great help from my advisor, Patrick Bowdish, from the Hasselplattner Institute in the VR walls work and all the earlier work I did on muscle stimulation. Incredibly grateful for that. And even more incredibly grateful for all my students at the Human-Computer Integration Lab at the University of Chicago. They did all the other works that you saw today. And I'm happy to answer questions here if we have time, or in the Slack, I'll be there as well. And thanks, Saranga, for the invitation. This is such a lovely event.